Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am your host, Roberta. If you are looking to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast you should be tuning into. And by the end of this episode, please go to our iTunes URL and subscribe, give a rating and a review. My guest today is the author of This is Coaching. He is an executive leadership coach and TEDx speaker who focuses on leaders and how they can be more productive through being mindful and all the other things that come with that. And before I go any further, please help me welcome him to the show. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Roberta. It's great to be with you today.
Welcome. Thank you for being with us today. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you, you named beautifully a highlight of the business stuff that I work on. So as a coach, I work with the crazy leaders who think that they can make impossible things happen in the world. They're like me. I'm always trying to make impossible things happen. I also work with coaches to support them in being better coaches. And on the personal side, I grew up just outside Detroit in Michigan. I'm a good Midwestern guy. Grew up going up north, hanging out on the lake, playing baseball, doing all that stuff. And since 2020, have lived just outside Denver in Colorado with my fiance. We're getting married in June.
Congratulations.
I'm really excited about that. Thank you. And now we're about to finish ski season right now and get back into hiking season. So I'm really excited for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it's a good thing you escaped the Midwest. I think last week there was a snowstorm again.
Yeah, I to help my own sanity, I don't check out the weather in Detroit, but
You did leave it behind, yeah.
yeah, it's bright and sunny here, and really happy about that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All hail to Denver. So, how did you have a corporate career before you got started in coaching?
Yeah, so I graduated in college in 2007. And then started my career right at the start of the financial crisis. So it was a really interesting time to start my career. I was lucky enough to land a job at the University of Michigan, which is pretty insulated by from a lot of the economic impact. I was a marketer in my early days. I went into marketing because I've always been really interested in why people do what they do and sort of understood the behaviors of people. And right at that time was when social media was becoming really popular and people were asking the question, is Facebook going to be around again? In fact, the first 6 months of my career, Twitter didn't even exist. And so it was this really fascinating time to be in the world online and saying, like, what's really going to happen? And so I spent about 6 years, between 6 and 8 years, depending on how we want to think about when I started my business, working in the marketing side, both at University of Michigan, but also at agencies, a couple of different agencies. And that was when I really got to experience the different ways that leaders are leading today, the different ways that organizational cultures exist, and started to see stuff that I didn't really like that inspired me to start thinking about if I was going to do something different for my career, what might that be? And that started me down the path of coaching.
You were in marketing. Here's what I've always wondered about marketing professionals. Do you have to be really creative in that slogan type of coming up with things like just do it? Is that because I've always thought to myself, how do they come up with these really cool phrases? Is that the requirement? Is that what makes you thrive in a job like that?
Definitely not exclusively that, right? So there are often creative departments, and that's often people, when they think about marketing, they think about advertising. So like the fancy commercials, very creative. And that's a part of the marketing world. Another part is some like way more on the analytics side. So a lot of folks are way more data oriented than me, especially in today's internet world, which is like, we can look at literally every step that someone has taken before they become a customer and now that they're a customer and onward. And so that's also, that big data is a huge part of marketing. Where I really personally focused a little bit on the creative side, but more on the strategy of like, how do we communicate as a human with these folks? How do we make it really easy for them to be a customer, but also just to tell their friends about us, to feel really happy or engaged with us, to feel like they're really welcomed. And that I think is a skill that I've taken into everything that I have now, right? Which is like, how can I get into the other person's perspective to really understand them? And that's really useful for me as a coach.
Mm. A combination of that, and like you said, that's when social media was starting to be a big thing. So when you analyze people's buying behaviors, did then social media start to gather the data as well over time?
Yeah, I mean, folks now can get insane amounts, right? I don't know if you use Facebook or Instagram, but all of
Not
those
all of them,
ads,
yeah.
yeah, right. Like I like both am terrified about the fact that the ads that I get are super personalized and always things that I want to buy, but I also love it. So I'm deeply conflicted on a regular basis. And that basically
Here's
was my experience.
here's the thing. I'm more concerned now. It used to be fun, like you said, you had both sides of, oh, this is nice, because I was really Googling this. But I could literally have a conversation and not even Google. So it's not on the cloud or on my search history. But how do they know I was just telling my boyfriend that I was thinking of this? And then it becomes an ad on my Facebook feed.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I got out of the business, to be honest, is that I started to realize, yeah, and I was spending so much time trying to get people to spend more time on their phones or on their devices, but then leaving and going to dinner with friends and saying, hey, like, get off your phone and let's talk. Like, let's be humans together, please. And so I was definitely in a massive conflict, and that had me really start to look at what I was doing with my life.
That is interesting because on your tech talk, you actually do talk about the concerns you have regarding how much time we spend on the screen. Would you like to share more of that now that you did a 180?
Well, so we have some of the smartest people in the world, right? People who understand human behavior way better than me, PhDs, creatives who really get it, right? And there's a lot of science about how we interact. And they're using all of those tools to keep us on our devices as long as possible, because they're measured by number of hours we spend, right? Or we talk about Netflix, right? The number of hours that we binge a show, or how quickly people binge a show, actually determines whether it's has signed on for a second episode or a second season or not, right? So the metrics are often in how can we condense human attention into a very short span, or try to get it as long as possible. And so what that means is that we have literally millions and billions of dollars conspiring to keep us addicted to these devices, and they're playing on our basic human biology. It's not to say any of that is evil. It just is. That's sort of the state of the world. And the way that I think about it is, if we can simply acknowledge that technology is not going to slow down. ChatGPT-4 is here. It is changing the way that we think and communicate. That's not going to go away. The question I have is, how do we lead in the midst of that? How do we remain human in the midst of that? How do we remain creative in the midst of that? And how do we take care of ourselves as biological beings in the midst of that? So that is really what I think about in a long-term sort of capacity these days.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely not going away. And some of the things are good. Like I'm talking to you, you're in Denver, I'm in Chicago. We're thankful for that. But
Yeah.
how do we have this sort of self-control of how many hours you spend looking at screens? Do you have that luxury, especially if you work? A lot since the pandemic, a lot of people went hybrid. Do you have that luxury, or should you really just have boundaries as well of when you just shut everything down and focus on the people you're with? Like you said, when you what with the friends, get off the phone.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Well, I think first of all, it is our personal responsibility. So that's first to accept that, right? Like basically the system is designed to suck us in. If we just acknowledge that that's how it is, then we can start to have choice. And I'll share that, like, I'm not immune to this. So my book launched this week. And so especially on the 4th and the day of launch, I was on my computer at 8 a.m., which was way earlier than usual these days. And I was on it the whole time, checking every single social network, checking Slack, checking email on a second by second basis, both on my phone and my computer. And I felt myself getting pulled back into that. I downloaded Facebook on my phone for the first time in a year so that I could participate around the launch and support people. And I could feel myself getting sucked in. And so I really get it. Like first of all, like really get when folks feel like I don't really have a choice and I don't know how to move out of it. And I would say that this is where I look, and this is where I look as a coach with my clients, this is where I look personally, is thinking about what do I really want to be committed to as a human being. And so if my health is really important to me, if for me being outside is, I know, really good for my health, if that's really important, then how do I want to make decisions? And if I'm an organizational leader, then I can think about what type of culture do I really want to have? And knowing that I can design a culture that is good for other people and profitable, do I want to do that? That just simply requires me to make different choices compared to if I don't actually care about people's technological health. So really, I think it's a time to look inward and ask ourselves what really actually matters to me, and am I willing to make decisions based on that?
It sounds like an exercise in self-awareness, which in your TED Talk, you mentioned that self-awareness questions are not on the personality test. Would you like to take us through that?
Yeah, well, and in my model for mindful leadership, self-awareness is number one, is the number one thing, which is, and often we think that self-awareness is like a place we can get to, right? Like I can score 100% in self-awareness and now I have it crossed off and I'm great. I don't think that's how it works. Because everything in life is always changing, and that includes us. And so to me, self-awareness is the willingness to be in an inquiry to ourselves about what's happening for me in this moment. What are my thoughts, judgments, feelings, emotions, etc.? What are my values? What is my purpose? To be willing to ask these questions that don't necessarily always have a really simple answer or a really easy answer. Sometimes it's very often very nuanced. There might be conflicts in that answer. I might value productivity. I might value like connection, and I might also value being alone. And so all it does is point us toward some inquiries around how do I start to make decisions, knowing that these things are true for me, at least right now in this moment. And so often the work that I do as clients, and you ask me, do I talk about mindfulness in my work? I really don't these days, even though all of this is an act of mindfulness, just willing to be with ourselves in that inquiry.
Why don't you mention mindfulness so much? Because it sounded to me like that is, a big part of your work. What do you think scares people? But especially with meditation, do they suddenly think, oh my goodness, it's turning me into a Buddhist?
Yeah,
what scares people about mindfulness so much?
So I love that question too. I started Golden Bristle when I was in Tennessee, in Nashville. So right in sort of the Bible Belt of the United States. And so I've always been really intentional about my speaking about it, right? It can be related to a particular religion or a particular spiritual belief, and it doesn't have to be. So first of all, just mindfulness as a concept is, again, being in this inquiry of what's happening for me in this present moment, what's happening around me in this present moment. That's it. And it's a practice. It's like getting up and doing bicep curls at the gym on a regular basis. That's it. It's a practice. What specifically the word mindfulness, because I don't know that everyone has that understanding of it. It's a pretty loaded term. And I'll share that even meditation for me, I decided to start Golden Bristle without ever having meditated, even though I've been deeply interested in sort of Eastern philosophy and religion my whole life. And that's because I thought meditation was something that I had to do, or that was hard, or there was a right way to do it. And so I had a very like Western idea of how to do it. And I think that's true for a lot of people, especially in the business world. And to your point, people are saying, well, I'm so busy. How am I going to find 10 minutes to sit quiet? I literally can't do that. And that's also the point. But I've stopped talking about it because I'm not actually interested in having that conversation about trying to convince people that meditation is the thing. Instead, what I direct them to is, what has you curious about mindfulness? What is your experience when you sit down for 5 minutes? What is the impact of that experience on your life? So why is that really beneficial? For example, if your mind keeps running, why is that happening? And what does that limit in your life if your mind keeps running? What might happen if you had the ability to start to move through that so that you could have more stillness? If more stillness was available to you, if more feeling in your body was available to you, if more connection with other people is available, what might happen for you? What things might be available in your life on the other side? So that's where I'm more interested in the conversation these days.
Do you think sometimes, I don't know what your experience is, and please feel free to share with some of the clients when you ask them those questions. Do you think some people are afraid to be still?
Yeah, I'm afraid to be still. So I know that my clients are, and for good reason, right? Like, so my job as a coach is to understand completely someone else's perspective, to make everything they're doing completely perfect. My belief is that that's the only way that we can actually change, is if we can actually accept our current situation. And so as a coach, if I can see that, I can support my clients in also having that realization. So there are a whole lot of reasons, if someone is afraid to be still, that it makes sense for them to be afraid to be still. Right? They've probably been taught that productivity is the way to feeling good about themselves. They've been taught that they need to keep moving. It's probably scary for them on some level to be still, because maybe the thoughts that come up are not pleasant thoughts. And they actually don't understand that at some point, once they see those thoughts, they can do something with them, right? For any number of reasons, it's really scary. And I totally get that.
So it's either the fear of feeling like I'm missing out on something by just sitting still when I could use that time to get to the next step, or I'm afraid of what I may be thinking about, rather the distraction, maybe.
Those are two possibilities. I think they're infinite. What I'm curious about is what is actually happening for the person, because it's like, you know, when we had, I don't know if you had this, like people have nightmares where a monster is chasing them, and then
I've
often
had
the story
those.
is
I have a phobia for snakes. So if I have a nightmare, usually I've seen a snake and then I wake up immediately. Yeah, I'm scared of snakes. So scared.
Yeah,
I can't even watch them on TV. I don't watch National Geographic because of that.
Because of snakes.
That's how
I
big
imagine
the
it's very
phobia
scary.
is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. My hometown
Often,
had them. That's why.
oh, so you probably grew up scared, right? So your body has inherited that fear.
I never made the connection actually. I just, oh, yeah. Because my hometown has them, like you on the ground, we've been playing and with kids in the street, and it just glides past to the bush. It's a very tropical, it's almost like, think of Jamaica in Africa, very tropical, humid
Yeah.
town. And 9 months of the year, it's very hot. So there's quite a few. Oh, actually, so that fear has carried me since. Wow. Huh.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And what you just actually, this is really perfect, because that's often what happens. So if we're using this idea of sitting still, often at some point when someone was young, their body created this nervous system response to being still, where it was actually really scary to do that. And so what we do is we internalize a fear of even looking at it. You just looked at it, right? So you're like, oh,
Yeah.
that is a thing. And often once we look at it and bring it to light, we can shift it. But it takes a tremendous amount of courage to actually look at it in a moment for most of the time.
Scary. It really is. Just like it's scary for people to be still. So I think, yes. So that means from childhood, that's still triggering at 47.
Yeah, and that's totally normal. This is what happens for most people. And I could see it in your body as I'm looking, right? Like there's a felt response. And often many of us have that. And it isn't just sitting still, it is many times for the things we really want in life. And so I just really respect anyone who's willing to transform, because it takes so much courage to do that.
To actually first admit that this is a fear for me, and to speak it out. Because let's be honest, sometimes when I'm around people, a lot of people are not afraid of snakes. Some have them, especially here in America, have them in their homes as pets. And so it sounds like I'm a bit of a coward, or I'm not as brave as the others around me who are not as afraid.
Yeah. And what I love about fear is that, one, it operates really well in sort of obscurity. So it's like generalized fear. It's like like mist. Like if it can stay cloudy and misty, it can hold more, we can hold on to it more. And then
Mhm.
secondly, it uses other emotions to block it. So it uses shame, where you're like, I must not be as strong or as powerful or as courageous as other people. And so we get stuck in the shame, and we don't actually see that the fear is the thing that's driving the show.
Wow. Hmm. So anyway, we were talking about nightmares before we got distracted with my phobia.
No, I think you gave us a perfect example. So thanks for being willing to do it.
Appreciate that. Thank you for your kind words, Matt. Now, sorry, on your TED Talk, you talk about you've met some really good leaders in your lifetime and some bordering horrible ones.
Yeah.
How did you start to notice, and when did you start to notice these different types of leadership styles?
It was really apparent to me at my first job at the University of Michigan. So the U of M Business School where I worked has some really amazing professors who are thought leaders in the world of human resources, HR, and leadership. So I got to see like, oh, this is what really high-powered leadership looks like. And that awareness had me contrast it with both my own bosses, but then later on with when I worked in the agencies with my clients and their bosses. And I got to see how toxic cultures operate from top to bottom, when I could see that the actions of leadership were influenced how my clients treated me, and that influenced how I treated other people. And I could see how it rolled downhill. But arguably the first experience I had of what leadership and culture and organizational health looked like was very early from my mom. She worked in healthcare my entire life. And healthcare, I believe at least, has notoriously poor leadership on a lot of levels. A lot of doctors who haven't been trained in leadership skills are led to believe that they can't make any mistakes, because that's what a doctor has to believe in order to be able to have people's lives in their hands. Like, again,
Right.
that makes sense. But what that leads to is a lack of willingness to say, oh, I made a mistake. And that leads to toxic behaviors where no one is afraid or no one is willing to admit that they made a mistake. Everyone blames everyone else. And there's actually little accountability within the organization. And I saw that over and over in places my mom worked.
That's interesting because, there's a lot of ER style, Grey's Anatomy style TV shows. Yes, we hold doctors in high esteem, they save lives. But there's always this condescending tone they have towards nurses, even if the nurse knows more about the patient, because doctors just do rounds, whereas the nurses are there 12 hours straight looking after the patient. So they know a lot more history about this person. The doctor will come with their medical school trained vocabulary, and the nurse says, no, I'm sorry, doctor, no. Here's what happened here. I'm the doctor, that's usually their go-to. I'm the doctor.
Yeah.
They're not even willing to listen. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you have that experience too, right? I think it's pretty universal, and you can just imagine the ripple effect that has across a hospital. My fiance is a physician assistant, and so I continue to be in the healthcare world, through that. And so I see what it's like, and we have a lot of conversations about it.
And so when you noticed your mom, what she was going through, did you talk about it at home, or is it this idea that as kids, we usually think our parents are superheroes? They go to work, they can handle whatever comes their way, they come home and they always know their story. They always got it. They always handle it.
Yeah.
So when you notice those horrible leaders in where she worked and how they treated her, did you feel like, if it's doctors especially, that this is work, this is how work is, and one day I'll be a grown-up and this is what I'm going to go through?
I think I got all of that. So I still think my mom is insanely powerful and capable of doing a lot of stuff, right? She worked her way into management and leadership for many years without a college degree. Now she has an associate's degree. She earned that after she was already a single mom. Like, it's really incredible. Like, I see her as being able to change the world. And I started working with her in some summers and weekends when I was in high school. So I had a sort of firsthand experience of the different doctors. And I've had this sort of like gentle wisdom, even at a young age, where I can pick up what's happening in conversations and in environments, even if I didn't have the language for it when I was younger. And so even then I could see, oh yeah, this doctor I can tell respects people. He speaks to them this particular way. He might have this sort of habit or pattern where his ego gets in the way. This doctor over here is rude and disrespectful, and I can see how that interaction changes things. Like all of that was, again, even if I didn't have language, was really apparent to me. And so by the time I was in college and studying psychology and sociology, my mom and I were having quite in-depth conversations about leadership styles and about organizations and about how people showed up to work and what their motivations were. I mean, that was sort of how we bonded by the time I was 19, 20.
When did you start your business? Was it before or after COVID locked us down?
It was before. So I worked at marketing agencies until so I started Golden Bristle in 2015. It was a side hustle for about a year and a half. And so I was doing lunch and learns while working full-time at an agency. And then in 2016, I quit my job to do marketing consulting on the side while growing the organizational and coaching side of Golden Bristle. And I still did marketing consulting work for about 3 years. So 2020, I think, was the last year that I got an official sort of client paycheck for that marketing consulting work. So for about 4 years, I was sort of building my coaching business while doing consulting, sort of breaking down or kind of decreasing the consulting work.
The reason I ask is I wonder if you've noticed prior to 2020, people's priorities shifting when COVID happened.
What I noticed a lot of it during COVID, and at that time I was really focused on venture-backed founders, venture capital investors, folks in the startup world, is that there was a lot of fear and uncertainty during COVID, right? It was sort of like, is money ever going to be available for funding? Are our customers all going away because they don't have any money because they're going to all lose their jobs? There was a lot of that. And what I noticed was that there are a lot of leaders who care tremendously about their people and were doing a really poor job of taking care of themselves or getting support for themselves. And so we would host some free events where we would say, hey, if you're a founder or you're an investor and you're taking care of your founders, just show up and talk about what's going on. And so that became a really helpful point for me, both in understanding people, but also seeing where leadership sort of focuses were. And I'll say that since then, at least in that world, we had a tremendous influx of capital. A lot of money was flowing. People weren't worried, at least until the last couple of months, about money anymore. And so like the culture started to change from, oh, let's really take care of each other, to let's make as much money as possible. And it was really fascinating to also watch that. And again, like this, often these feel like their intention, right? Which is like, let's scale and make a bunch of money versus let's really take care of our people and think about the human side. I don't think they have to be in conflict, but often I find that leaders think they do.
No, and I always emphasize that as soon as we talk about take care of people, emotional intelligence, interpersonal skills, we always say disclaimer, businesses are still there to make money because we still want to get paid. That's true. Yeah. So we're not downplaying how crucial it is that they make money. But like you said, not at the expense of taking care of people.
Yeah, because if they break down, then who's going to do the work for you, right? I mean, it's like very clear.
So when you wrote the book, This Is Coaching, what are some of the main things that you focused on?
The book introduces my very simple but deeply nuanced framework on what coaching is, but which I also think is the same process as growth and transformation as a human, which is using the GPS navigation system as an analogy. And so when we open up the GPS app on our phone, the first thing it asks, if we ask for directions, is where do you want to go? We give it a very specific address. It locates us very specifically where we are right now. And only after it has those two things does it start to give us play-by-play directions. Right. And I think coaching is the same thing. It's just our clients are doing the courageous work of getting clear on what it is they want in life, They're doing the courageous work of getting clear on where they are right now, which sometimes, as we already established, can include looking at our fear when we don't really want to. And then once those two things are in focus, we just ask, okay, what's next? What's the step toward the thing that you want, given where you are?
Do you have these golden clients who just know what they want? Because apparently a lot of people don't.
You're right. Sometimes it is very clear for folks. And so personally, as a coach and as a human, I look at the wholeness of a person's life. So that means that I look at their business. That might be the financial aspect. It might be the emotional aspect. It might be the impact they're making. We look at their life. We look at their relationships. We look at their health. And I find that often people are clear in one direction or one aspect of life, and they're not that clear in the other aspects. And so often our work is putting more curiosity on the other aspects and noticing where they also have this either or idea. We talked about in business, it's either I make money or I take care of my people. We often have the same thing in our lives. Either I focus on my purpose in my business, or I have amazing relationships, or I get to sleep. And I love to challenge that idea as a coach and say, well, what if you could have all of it? How might you do that? And who might you have to be? And so what that then requires is we're constantly looking at, what do I actually want? I think that's it. Just as self-awareness is never done, asking ourselves what we want is never, ever, ever done.
Right. So it's constantly asking the question. It's not I want more money and more success, the motivational stuff. Because I think what people get stuck on is just say those things, but they, even in their minds, don't know what that really looks like. They just know the word success and I want more money, or I want my problems to go away, but not to actually be detailed and say, for me, this is exactly how I see my life going and where I see it going. And also, do you think social pressures could be the reason we're not very clear, because you think you're supposed to be something, or you're supposed to have a life that is a certain way, or that is like everybody else's who was considered successful?
Oh yeah. And on the idea of like getting clear, I think about it as like, if I put my GPS, I want to go to Illinois, I'm going to get much worse directions than if I put in your address in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like that. So that's why it's so important. And yeah, I think all of what you pointed out, this idea of social pressure, this idea of working hard to get clarity, this probably the fear of like, do I actually know what I want? All of that just comes with the territory. That is to say that it's worth being in the practice of asking ourselves, knowing that that's going to show up. So people often say, well, what if I ask for the wrong thing? And I say, well, great, at least you know now you don't want that, and be in the practice of it, right? And so yeah, I think social pressure is going to show up. That's part of it. And this is also why I love the idea of, we want to not only be clear on what we want or where we want to go, we also need to be clear on where we are. Because if I have the affirmation of I'm successful, and immediately I have a thought that says, no, you're not. And I'm
you're a
not
liar,
willing.
pants on fire.
Yeah, right. And I just try to blast through it. I'm actually not allowing myself to be clear on where I am, which is, oh, I want to feel like I'm successful. And right now I have a story that I believe that I'm not willing to look at most of the time that says that I'm not. And so once we start to, again, similar to you and snakes, once we start to look at that just current, honest reality for us, we can move it, we can do something with it. But the more we try to bury it and say that that should not be here, we have less room to move it. It's sort of like a immovable rock in our life.
That is usually a lot of my discussions when I'm invited to speak with other audiences. I always say, go back to the inner dialogue, go back to the inner dialogue. Because what The Secret movie and affirmations, people say, this thing doesn't work. And I've started to realize it's because it's like you're putting Band-Aid on a very deep scar. If you haven't removed that rock you're talking about, and you just stuff it with affirmations, you say, I'm successful, I'm wealthy, I'm healthy all day in the mirror, that stuff hasn't been cleaned up yet. That story, that rock is still there underneath that Band-Aid. So that's the step, I feel like, whenever we talk about the movie The Secret, that's the step that they missed. They just said to people, start sitting on your couch, visualize and say you're healthy, wealthy, and successful.
Yeah.
And then people wonder why it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think it's a real shame because I am a firm believer in the law of attraction, so all the things that come with it. When we actually allow it, when we allow ourselves to feel it and we listen to the full idea of the principles, right? Rather than, like you said, like blasting affirmations or putting on the Band-Aid. And what I've also found is there's an idea of like, oh, once I heal that wound, then my life is going to be great. And so when another obstacle or we encounter another wound, we think, oh, this is wrong. And I don't think that that is actually how it works, right? If we're continuing to grow, we're going to find more of those. And that's actually expected. And to me, is actually a good thing. I know it's challenging in the moment, it's scary and it hurts. But what it tells me is that, oh, this person's growing because we've encountered a new place for them to heal.
And that you've conquered that first rock before. So if the next one comes, you know that, you know what, I'm still here. I guess I can tackle this somehow. I'll figure it out. Yeah. Not for it not to be so scary. So what about mindfulness do you think people can use in order to during situations like that?
So there is an opportunity when we're feeling feelings or have thoughts to take a breath. And even if we don't it's helpful physiologically to take a breath. It just relaxes us. If we even don't have that capacity, just to ask ourselves, what's really happening for me right now? And I use, in my book, I establish an acronym that I hadn't used, but I use now called HALA, which is getting honest, accepting, loving, and accurate about our current situation, state, or moment. So honest is what's really going on. Accepting is allowing it to be. Loving is really giving ourselves compassion for that moment, for allowing it's perfect. It's okay, whatever we're feeling. And then when we have those, we can be really accurate, which means that we can locate ourselves in that moment so that we can move. And the more that we're able to do that, the more that we're able to say, feel that physiological response when we're afraid, or hear or notice that thought, the more we can spot it in the future. And so in many ways, doing the reps right now, asking that question right now, allows us, our future self, to be really good at spotting it even earlier. So it's like we're like giving a gift to our future self so that they can have movement. Even if right now it feels intractable, in a few days, in a few months, in a few years, it's not even going to be a thought anymore.
Honest, accepting, loving, and accurate.
Yes.
Why do we struggle with the loving part? Why do we struggle to be loving of ourselves when we make a mistake? But if you made a mistake, I'm the kindest person you'll ever hear from.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, Matt, things happen all the time. Oh, please, we're all human. People make mistakes. Don't worry. But if I do the exact same thing, I don't give myself that same loving voice in my head. Oh, how could you? Why the contrast? Because we are obviously capable. That's why we do it for other people.
I have a very spiritual answer, and that's what it means to be a human, which is that we chose this human life to be in that practice. Like that is, I think, arguably the primary challenge of our human life. There's plenty of like societal evidence if we want to like look at the sort of like science or psychology of it, which is that many of us are taught in our society that we're only worthy, that we only deserve love, that we only deserve respect if we win, or if we're successful, or if we achieve things, right? That's how our school system is based. That's how our workplace is based. Unfortunately, for many people, that's how their home life was based when they were growing up. So we're conditioned to that. It seems so universal that it just seems like a very human spiritual quest, though.
Have you, in your experience, seen leaders, what kind of transformations have they experienced when they, even though you don't introduce it as mindfulness, if they practice some of the tools that you give them during your coaching sessions?
So a lot of leaders, if the people who end up in leadership positions get there for two reasons. One, they're very smart, or two, they're very powerful. And those are strategies that become sort of automatic there's no conscious thought that happens. So I'm going to say the right answer, or I'm going to be very powerful. I'm going to be very insistent. And that produces a tremendous amount of success. And at some point it stops working, especially if their business grows beyond them, or the impact that they want to make is bigger than them. And through mindfulness, through this ability, as I talked about, to take a breath and asking what's happening for me, a couple of new behaviors can emerge. I'll talk specifically related to these two. One, for the person who's very smart, they can shut the heck up instead of having to have to say the last word. And so what that allows for is their people can have more confidence in speaking their minds. New ideas can come forward. The entire culture can shift because people feel like they're actually going to be heard and respected. And what happens is there are more powerful ideas coming out of the organization. The second is, so someone who's very powerful, they can also notice when they're being too pushy, relax and pull back. And often it's a very similar positive impact, which is that their people then step in to fill that gap and express their own power. And so instead of one person being uber powerful, have 5, 10, 20, 30 people all expressing their power. And when that happens, so much more cool stuff can happen.
So many more innovative ideas, because no matter how at the top you are of the ladder, it doesn't mean you know everything.
Yeah, for sure. And I got to experience this week with my book launch, is that I may have mentioned I have a community of more than 100 people who have been in support and read the book early. And if I had, the reality is I can't buy that many copies of the book myself. And I can't leave that many reviews of the book myself. So I need those people in, and I need those folks in such a way that they also feel like they're leaders, like they're enrolled in why what we're doing is important. And if I'm always just talking at them, they don't have the opportunity to step into their own leadership around that.
They are leaders, and it doesn't mean it comes with a position. Anybody can be a leader.
It's a choice. Yeah.
Matt, give us one piece of wisdom for individuals when it comes to mindfulness.
I'm going to pause, slow down to let myself think about that and hear that. There is a point during practice when we get really curious with ourselves, and we have the courage to look at our feelings, at our body sensations, at our thoughts. When we have this moment that is quiet, and when we realize that everything is okay. And for me, those moments are fleeting. They're few and far in between. And when I have them, I feel in touch with my wisdom. I feel in touch with the wisdom of the universe. I feel in touch with my power and creativity in a way that is only possible if I let that all be okay. And so the piece of wisdom I have for everyone is that is available to you. It might be scary to get to there. You might want to grasp onto it when you do find it, and that's okay. And it's always there.
And for leaders?
Same thing. Also, though, so when I gave this example of not being so smart, not being so powerful, so that others can step into leadership, my guess is many leaders started their business with that as one of their goals, having other people do amazing work and be leaders themselves. And you may have forgotten about it. Check in if that was one of the things you started your business for. Remember that. And remember again that no matter what your ego or your survival mechanisms or your fears say, you're actually more powerful with those people working as leaders with you, instead of you trying to do it all yourself.
Words of wisdom from Matt Thieleman, the author of This is Coaching, executive leadership coach, and TEDx speaker. Matt, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your insights today.
Thank you. It's been so fun. I so appreciate you.
I had fun as well. It's my pleasure. And before you go, where can we find you on the internet if we want to continue getting in touch with you?
Yes, you can find me on my website, which is goldenbristle.com. If you go to the website and scroll to the bottom and click the little boar, you'll see what the name Golden Bristle means. Oh, so there's a little Easter egg on the site.
Easter egg hunt, very perfect for this season, huh? goldenbristle.com. Matt Thieleman, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Don't forget to subscribe, give a rating and a review, and we'll be with you next time.